The Ukrainian military has announced that it controls over 1,000 square kilometers of Russian turf and growing. But is Putin going into full cope mode? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so when we look at the control map, you can see things are looking just a little bigger than they were before. But remember, this is still pretty conservative. You can see Ukrainian forces having advanced through Suja, seizing Yolanik, Borky, but now Russian forces are reporting fighting even further afield, Kemshoya, and in this tiny town whose name I have no idea, Ozerki. God, I hope they change the names of these places once they take them over. So again, you've got the Ukrainians expanding this border control outward, which of course it actually makes a lot of sense because you could see that with the closer you are to Ukrainian lines, Ukrainian territory, the easier a time they're going to have keeping their supply lines intact. But you could see that Ukrainian forces are still going deep as well as wide, pushing ever closer to the Kurchatov nuclear power plant, with also fighting reported around Kachuk, Snogast, and a number of these other ones. You're now seeing fighting right on the edge of Koronivo. And this is interesting because we saw that literally just 24 hours ago, the fighting was quite a distance from Koronivo, and Snagost was not held at all by Ukrainian troops. So this is a sign that, again, the Russian efforts to establish like real defensive lines simply aren't succeeding. And when you zoom it out, you realize too that in a lot of cases, right, when you compare the size of this incursion relative to the Russian efforts to advance near Ultra-Datina, which have not stopped, by the way, right, you can see that, again, Russian forces are continuing to divert their forces to expanding this bridgehead here, this salient, right, outside of Avdiivka. Essentially, this, though, I think the key difference is that this is the result of really around maybe up to a year since about November, at least since 2023, has been this effort, right? You might remember the Battle of Avdiivka showing Russia kind of pulling Ukrainian forces out, and Russian forces are instead advancing, but against a Ukrainian force that is prepared to run a defense in depth. You also see, again, Russian efforts to seize Toretsk, which again is likely right in this area here. But again, you're not seeing them actually succeed at it. So to me, the pace, while the Ukrainians are starting a little late, their pace is definitely escalating a lot, and they will likely exceed the total territory seized by Russia in a year, possibly in as little as the next few weeks. Again, the fact that Russia doesn't seem willing to divert any of its forces in eastern Ukraine is probably responsible for these Russian advances, or these Ukrainian advances, right? Syrskyi himself, we went from yesterday, Zelensky acknowledging that there was fighting in Russia at all, to now saying that they control 1,000 square kilometers of Russia's Kursk Oblast. As we know, it's likely part of an effort to strengthen the Ukrainian negotiating position. But what's also interesting is that Russia's regional authorities, and this is one of those rare instances when we get to see sort of the difference between the two, Russia's regional authorities are saying that Ukraine controls 28 settlements in Kursk Oblast, and claiming that the incursion is 12 kilometers deep along a 40-kilometer front. Now, for those of you that are somewhat math challenged, 12 by 40 is not, in fact, 1,000. It is, in fact, 480. So the Russians are acknowledging, I guess it would help to see it, the Russians are acknowledging less than 50% of what the Ukrainians claim to be controlling. Again, it's hard to exactly forecast this, but this indeed appears to be a confirmed, I'd say it's about a 40 by 10 kilometer, maybe a little bit. This is about 40 by 20. So that would likely be what we're looking at. This is probably closer to reality, closer to the Ukrainian assessment, with, again, Ukrainians controlling even more. See, so this is a really, really stark turn of events here. Now, if you're interested in seeing some of the footage coming out of the combat in Kursk Oblast, that video is dropping today in just an hour or two for members only on Combat Vet News. You guys know that I don't take any money from media outlets. A lot of times sponsors don't even want to be involved. And frankly, if a sponsor has conditions about my content, I just tell them no. I make the content I make. But that means that I depend on you guys to keep me able to do this every single day. Keep me and the team chugging along, dropping these updates 7 days a week. So if you want to help me out, you can go to combatvetnews.com and become a member. Twice a week, we do uncensored combat videos from the front line. Deep dive analysis that lets us see the tactics, what's going on, right? Just recently, we looked at some of the early fighting in Kursk, and we saw just how ill-prepared the Russian conscripts were. In a lot of cases, surrendering en masse, right? In ways that we couldn't really put here on YouTube. Of course, if you want to get the lieutenant tier, that'll get you all those videos plus the weekly Q&A. And the colonel tier, if you really want to support me and really appreciate what I do, that'll get you the by name shoutouts at the end of the videos. Now, let's talk about Putin's cope. The link is in the description for Combat Vet News, by the way. Okay. So, old Vladimir Putin. Now, I looked up the transcripts of the recent Russian meetings regarding this situation. This is some of the first public statements that Russia has made about the Ukrainian advance. But as Putin himself acknowledges, he says it seems the opponent is aiming to strengthen the negotiating position for the future. Yep. However, what kind of negotiations, he says, listen to this cope. However, what kind of negotiations can we have with those who indiscriminately attack civilians and civilian infrastructure and pose threats to nuclear power facilities? What is there to discuss with such parties? Which is absolutely comical. Again, as you guys know, Russia in the initial invasion targeted deliberately the Chernobyl former nuclear power plant and also seized Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, with the IAEA repeatedly condemning Russian actions there, where they would station military forces there. In fact, they actually went out of their way, Russia, just this week to threaten a nuclear power plant where they lit tires on fire inside the cooling towers in order to create the perception that there was a threat or some kind of damage that Russia had inflicted on Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And so to sit there and say, wow, how can you negotiate with people who pose threats to nuclear power facilities? This may be Russia's way of saying, we're not going to negotiate because we do all of these things. Again, attacking civilian infrastructure is too on the nose, right? We know that Putin has been on a campaign every winter. In fact, he targets Ukrainian energy infrastructure in an effort to demoralize the Ukrainian population. And of course, indiscriminately attacking civilians is something firmly in the Russian tactical sort of tool bag, using their deep strike weapons, right? Where they hit a children's cancer hospital. Like, really, guys? Really? The sick kids were the ones who are gonna go after you? Here's the other annoying thing. Putin can end this anytime he wants. As the U.S. National Security Advisor, spokesman John Kirby said, Putin can just get the hell out of Ukraine if he's so worried about Kursk. If he just goes home, just pack his things up and go home, right? Make no mistake about it, Kirby says. This is Putin's war against Russia. If he doesn't like it and it's making him a little uncomfortable, there's an easy solution. He can just get out of Ukraine and call it a day, right? And this is, as he talked about, in some ways, this is true, right? Russian conscripts are on the front lines now. One report said up to 2,000 had been reported captured. That's a lot of Ukrainian troops that Ukraine can get back. But more than that, right? This war has cost the Russian people dearly, right? Large scale inflation, a huge and growing public debt load, a huge portion of Russian government spending is diverted now to the military, right? Instead of supporting Russian social services and other kind of essentials that the government needs to do to support its people. So, Russia is out there really paying a considerable price. And the fact is that for all of their claims of victory and seizing, Novo Russia or whatever they're calling it, Russia is now weaker, more isolated, and doesn't even control all of its own turf. It actually controls less turf, less of its own sovereign nation than it started the conflict with, which is a little embarrassing. In fact, it's very embarrassing for Putin, and I think he likely is going to try his best to downplay this. Anyway, guys, that is all I had. Hope you guys join us over on combatvetnews.com. Especially thanks to Martin Baum, Greg Pace, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, James Ola, Chris Holmes, and Chris Gorsuch. Could not do this without you guys. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. Thanks to our lieutenant tier members. And I'll see you guys over on combatvetnews.com later today. Thanks. See ya. Cheers.